All right, so this is Red Power Ranger and me. This was a store display. It is really cool. If it comes up for bid, well, I'll be here.
Hi, I'm George the Antique Nomad. Come with me as I wander the country in search of valuable vintage, amazing antiques, and cool collectibles. We'll buy, sell, and trade at antique malls, shops, and shows, estate sales, flea markets, thrift stores, anywhere people go to find really interesting things that just aren't made anymore. So come on, let's go! Hello everybody, this is George the Antique Nomad at the Antique Nomad on Periscope, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and here on YouTube, and it's nice to be back with you. I am participating in the Hometown Challenge put on by Fatbird Finds, and I'm going to show you a little bit about one of my adopted hometowns, and that is Dawson Springs, Kentucky. I've been very fortunate to have very generous hosts during the quarantine, and this has been a wonderful place to be, and it's a much more interesting town than you might think on the surface. So we're going to look back at the history of the town and look forward into what collecting in Dawson Springs is like today.
While the past may have left Dawson Springs behind, Dawsonians have not left the past behind. There are a lot of collectors in the area, and you see evidence of that various places you go around town, including this great car shed with the Model T on the right and a really neat old tractor on the left.
So Dawson Springs begins and ends right here on the Tradewater River, which you can hear in the background. It's a place that Native Americans gathered, and then when the train came through, it became Tradewater Station, was later renamed Dawson Springs. The discovery of water wells made Dawson Springs a very important resort town right around the turn of the last century. This forlorn-looking pump is all that remains of the original Hamby's well. Hamby was the one who discovered the wells and realized that they were rich in iron and lithia, which were commonly prescribed as cures for anemia and many other problems plaguing people in the late Victorian era. And he built a hotel, which no longer stands on this site, but the original pump in the lobby is still here. Here we see the Hamby Hotel and Well. This was the first of the water resorts in the city, and this sprung up in 1893. It was a pretty bold thing to do because 1893 was a year of terrible financial panic, and yet Hamby made a big success out of this because he had something to offer that people needed. Behind me here we see the original dam and little waterfall of Dawson Springs. This was the edge of town, and that's where they put the grist mill. Grist mills were very important in the life of small towns. You needed some place to take grain to mill into flour so that local people could be fed. It's long gone, but a local collector has kept the grist wheels. He's actually made a point to go to auctions and liquidation sales in this town for the last 25 years and try to collect as many things from the local area to keep them preserved. It's really great because it means that it hasn't been lost to the town. This family does auto restoration in the back of the old Ford garage in Dawson Springs, and they've been kind enough to share their collection of old Dawson Springs and regional items that have been saved from destruction. They are not for sale, unfortunately, but we'll talk a little about what they'd be if they were. The DX sign at the top, that was the DX station a block from here, and the Gulf sign came from the Gulf station out on the freeway. That Gulf station is long abandoned, but it and its 5 acres of freeway fronting footage is for sale for $75,000. At some point, someone's going to realize that we're in the middle of the NAFTA highway between Canada and Mexico, and that for $75,000, you're not going to find freeway frontage. The bits of the past that are preserved here are great. The double cola sign would have been from the Squeeze In restaurant next door. The Squeeze In was squeezed in between 2 existing buildings and was a little soda fountain for many years. The Coca-Cola vending machine is one of several we're going to see in this display. The gas pump here also came out of the old DX. They have an SO topper on it because I don't think they've been able to find a DX topper.
These gas pumps were done about 1950, and you'll actually see salt and pepper shakers of these in collectible shops as well.
All of the hotels of the water spa era are gone in Dawson Springs, but one old hotel remains from before that period of time. This is the Darby House, built in 1886. It's currently the Welcome Center for the Chamber of Commerce, but they are looking for someone to take it over and turn it into a bed and breakfast, because Dawson Springs, other than the lodge out at the resort park near us, which we'll see, is not really heavy on lodging, and there are people who come to town and would like a place to stay in town. So if anyone out there is looking for an opportunity, this would be a really fun building to take and use for that purpose. Darby House is on the National Register of Historic Places. There's several other old buildings in Dawson Springs that would be appropriate for that designation too, but they're looking for a reason to exist in the new landscape, and we're going to talk about some ideas for that.
This is a very hard to find Ford Mustang pedal car, and I'll show the front here. These are really cool. They're based on the 1964 to 6 Mustangs, and you just never see this pedal car. A good pedal car in good shape like this is a junior AMF from the time. Mustang is so desirable as a real car that the pedal cars are as well, and this is easily worth over $500.
Downtown Dawson Springs was a vital and thriving place up until the 1990s, when NAFTA sent the last industrial production here away and the coal mines played out. This reminds me a lot of towns in Washington I was involved with years ago in the antique business that became antique centers, because you have old buildings, obsolete for their original purpose, but ready for somebody to come in and do something. The real estate is cheap, and that's what antique stores and antique shops need. The other thing they need is population. And while there's not a lot of population here or a lot of money in this area, the great thing about Dawson Springs is it is 1 hour from Evansville, Indiana, 2 hours from Nashville, and an hour from Paducah, Kentucky, meaning that there's over 3 million people within a day trip, and antiquers like day trips. So if you are an antique dealer in a big city where you're concerned about social distancing and how you're going to run your business, you might think about bringing it here, making this a destination where people can go looking for antiques and vintage goods, because a building here could be as little as $75,000 renovated.
In the next window are a couple of really cool things. The Sky Chief Texaco gas station pump, that is restored. It's from the 1940s. It's an amazing restoration, and it's even got the original glass on the top. To the left, we see an unusual Coca-Cola machine. That is a skinny vendo machine, and that type was for small towns and really little places that only needed a small number of Coke bottles, and they're hard to find because of that. On top is the old 7-Up bottle display from a store. You like it, it likes you. That's also out of the 50s. Old memorabilia like this is very collectible now. These pieces have become so popular ever since American Pickers came on the air. And it's because they're so visual, and they are also so reminiscent for a lot of people of a time that is long gone. And on the left, we see the vendo machine from the late 40s for Coca-Cola that is more typically found. Very desirable. A nice restored one like that can be $1,500 to $2,000 easily. Underneath the pile of little Goodyear boxes and parts boxes for Wells ignition and the fire chief sign and the old Prestone antifreeze thermometer, all of which are worth between $75 and $150 a piece now, is an old Coca-Cola vending machine, and it is the countertop type from the 30s that says drink Coca-Cola, where they would pour ice in it and then you would just stick your hand down into it, and it had a drain pipe out of it. When I was a kid, our old general store down the street from us still was using that, and I remember all of us kids were fascinated by the idea that you actually had to stick your hand in the ice cold water to get a bottle of Coke, which was pretty good on a hot summer's day.
On the surface, this is a nice little baseball field where the local high school plays its games, but in reality, this was the beginning of spring training in baseball.
Very few people, even baseball fans, know that Dawson Springs hosted the Pittsburgh Pirates for the 1915, 16, and 17 spring training seasons. This was a big spring resort. That was the time of year that people came here for the healing waters and to rest and recuperate. And Riverside Park, which was originally known as Pirates Park, was the spring training home of Honus Wagner and the Pittsburgh Pirates. So one of the most famous early names in baseball spent a lot of time in Dawson Springs. The New Century Hotel added on a wing so that the Pirates could stay there every year.
This was the finest hotel in town. It was quite splendid. This is where all the baseball teams stayed when they came to town in the spring training years.
The Cincinnati Reds, the Boston Red Sox, the Toledo Mud Hens, teams from St. Paul and Columbus all came here to play. It was a really big deal, so much so that it attracted the attention of St. Petersburg, Florida's Mayor Al Lang, who suggested to the Pirates that if they moved to St. Pete, they could practice in the winter and have a jump on all the other teams. And that was the beginning of all the spring training moving to Florida. But a little over 100 years ago, this is the spot where those teams played. This is a recreation of the original grandstand, but it is a very faithful recreation. It would have held about 1,000 people, and it was all wooden. That's how these things were made back in the early teens. And there's just not many things recreated or original left like this.
So Dawson Springs has one business that has been around for a long time and has recently changed hands, and really for the better for the antique and collecting community. And a lot of people come here for this because we are at Cotton's auction. And Mark Cotton is a great guy. He's a friend of mine and the auctioneer. He took over 3 years ago, and it has really turned around from being kind of a junk auction to a true place to find antiques and vintage. He is getting ready for his next auction. They're going to reopen for auctions hopefully at the beginning of July sometime. So we're getting a pre-auction preview, and we're going to take a look at some of the things. This is just sort of an assortment for this auction, but it's kind of typical of the things that he gets in, and there's some cool stuff here. This washing machine in particular is a really unusual item with this stainless. It's the James washer on the stand here. And it's really cool, and these are pretty valuable. Crocs go really well here. I have learned that this is the place to sell Crocs, and this is Ool out of Huntington, Indiana, which is not too far from here. A lot of collectors of Ool in this area, and this is a nice big number 8. We see a lot of farm items like egg crates here, and they always do well. We also see a lot of things out of kitchens from the past. This enamelware red is a nice piece. I sold something similar to this for $20 or $25 fairly recently. This auction prices are fair. You can buy here and you can buy for resale. So I will definitely come back. I get to look at it today, but I can't buy till the auction happens. Big old spinning wheel here. And behind it we've got a tobacco flat. These have become very popular to collect. People like to use them for decoration. I've seen people put legs on them and a glass top as a table. It's amazing how inventive people are with this old farm stuff now. Primitives do sell. This little red trunk here is nice, from about 1900 with the tacking on it, and inside, oh, a whole bunch of books. It's got some of its original liner. You know, it's worn, but it's intact. The hinges are still good, and the color is great. So this is something that somebody will like to have. A lot of times people take these and then they kind of wax them up, put them in their shop and put double or triple the price on them. Nice set of screen print here out of the 40s or 50s, and you can tell, I always like to tell people, look for the color on the inside to make sure that the outside isn't too worn out. And these are in pretty good shape because the color on the inside and the outside is about the same. Bunch of spools, nice old copper boiler. The copper ones are selling for a lot more these days, even without a lid, because a lot of people are using them to put kindling or newspapers in, so they're not really just for use in a kitchen anymore. In fact, the old ladies who see them, who used to have to use them, always roll their eyes and say they're really glad they don't have to do that anymore. So these are gate pieces. I didn't recognize these. I was trying to figure it out, and Mark told me what they were. They actually came out of a yard. These types of Architectural ornaments are very popular now. People like to use them in any numbers of ways. Sometimes they just hang a single one as an ornament, but a lot of times people are using these to put together racks, and you could make furniture out of these, and there's a big stack of them. So these are going to date somewhere probably right around 1890 to 1900, judging by the style. And I have a feeling that somebody will have a use for them and that they'll go for good money. We got a thimble collection here, and then behind it a nice old spool cabinet. It doesn't have the knobs, but the old knobs were just the simple glass or metal, and they're actually pretty easy to find, but it does have the J.P. Coates labels on it. You'd have this on a counter in a store around 1900 or so, and you'd pull out whatever you wanted, whether it was colored or white or black, and those are very desirable. Anything with lots of little drawers these days. Now, I got to think somebody out there had this when they were a kid. Hulk is certainly somebody that everybody from a certain era recognizes. He actually lives in Clearwater, Florida now, and there are lots of interesting stories coming out of his house. In the old water spa days, when Dawson Springs was a major resort and people came from as far as Chicago and Cincinnati and St. Louis for the recuperative nature of the waters and the hotels here, part of the appeal was that you could come and rest and relax somewhere for a week or a month. And so there were 40 different hotels and boarding houses in Dawson Springs, all of which are gone now. But they started doing these annual mugs, and they were based on the mugs that people back in the water spa days, you would buy a souvenir mug. The old ones from around 1900 are very expensive, usually in the $65 to $85 range if you can find them. These are ones that were done later after the hotel years, but these are collectible in their own right because they show all the old hotels. This is the Arcadia. This was one of the finer hotels. It had its own park with 10 different springs. Each well was supposed to have different qualities, although they all pretty much came from the same water source. The Hotel Niles was another one. You see a $10 tag out of a store. They usually sell for that or a little bit more. There was the St. Earl Hotel. These are fun because on the back they usually talk a little bit about the hotel as well. When it was built, what the attractions were. The New Century Hotel had an orchestra that played in the dining room every night. That was the big fancy place. The old kitchen scale is a Montgomery Ward's. You can see on the side it's got the old MW decal. And Montgomery Ward's actually was before Sears. They started doing catalog orders across the country in the 1870s and were a really big thing in the department store era until they were taken over by Mobil Oil, which did not know how to run a department store, and that was their undoing. It's funny because I always say Montgomery Ward's, but it really was Montgomery Ward, and in later years they shortened it to Ward's with an apostrophe, and I always get that confused. Railroad lock here, and this one has the logo. You can always find the logos on it. This is the Louisville and Nashville. Took me a minute to get that out of it, but this would have been on the L&N lines, and people definitely like to collect railroad locks. I've had the good fortune to buy interesting lights from boats and cars here before, and I like this one. This looks like it's right out of the 50s off of a boat because it's blue. But it isn't from a boat because it says SAE, and that tells us it's the Society of Automotive Engineers, so this must have been some sort of a marker light. The fact that it's blue means it may have had something to do with an official car like police or road work or something. The old 2-quart glass churns, these are very popular with collectors again. And this one is intact with all its pieces and it works, which is great. Some people actually do still churn with these, although they're mainly used as decoration in kitchens now. I keep finding tobacco boxes from Greenville. Greenville is a place that has a big swap meet every Tuesday, and we'll have to go out there sometime and show it off. But this is a nice tobacco box. It's got the Rice Tobacco Company Greenville, Kentucky mark on it. And then on the side, you'll see that it was cut down. This is something to look for with boxes and such. You'll notice that this said United something and it's gone. So this actually either had a lid or was a little larger originally. Still a neat piece though, and then it's got this stamp on it. This would have been a tobacco revenue stamp, and that's a good way to date these. This one would date to sometime around 19 teens or 20s. In here, there's some coins, and coins always sell well anywhere you go. There's some silver certificates. There's a money clip made out of a Liberty walking $50. A lot of these were made into jewelry back in the 50s and 60s before people really started collecting them. Occasionally, you'll find a rare date in a piece like that. And then there's also some Nazi confiscation pieces, these Second World War German, I believe those are 5 Pfennig. To the left is a 1914 D. In fact, there are 2 of them. That's a very hard date to find. D was the Denver Mint, and I believe in 1914 they did some sort of a renovation and were closed half the year, so they made a lot fewer of those than they would in ordinary years. These were given out for guys to use as fobs, and that way you would remember to get your road grader from Caterpillar. And this one's a case with the front loader. That's a pretty collectible area, usually $15 to $25 retail, and more if they're unusual or old. There's a nice case knife. That's a great name in pocket knives. I've had the fortune to buy a couple of those here before. And next to it is an old stag. I'm not sure who made the old stag. That'll be something to do a little research. There's some Camillus and other companies in here as well. Pocket knives always sell well, and they sell well anywhere that you go, and they do well at this auction.
Waterpark is where back in the water spa days people would come and take boats and canoe down the river. Nowadays people rent kayaks and take them down the river. Tradewater kayaks and canoes are rented right here. I've taken the kayak down the Tradewater. It's really a fun trip. It's a nice easy river with a slow pace and a wonderful thing to do on a hot and humid day. This trail that I'm on over the bridge here actually goes all the way to the Pennyrile Resort Park, and it is a horse trail. Dawson Springs was named Kentucky's first trail town, meaning it's the center of a number of nature trails that go to interesting places, and this one ahead of us goes by horseback, winding back and forth about 13 miles.
Here's a bunch more great signage and ephemera from the area's history. Of particular note is the Stardust Inn beer and dancing. The big deal about that was beer. You had to go over the county line across the river to a county that was not dry in order to drink beer back in that time. That was a honky tonk on the edge of town, and apparently it was quite a rambunctious place because it was the only place you could go party in the whole area. Dawson Springs actually voted itself wet about 6 or 7 years ago. So you get a margarita at the Mexican restaurant, and there's 2 drive-through liquor stores, which immediately opened as soon as that was allowed. Some other interesting pieces. Byerly's was an orange soda out of the West Coast that was distributed well into the Midwest. That thermometer is worth about $125 to $150. The Pennzoil lubrication department is from an old station here in town, and that's going to be worth several $100s now. These large signs are just really hard to find in good condition anymore.
At one time, Dawson Springs had all of the big 3 car makers selling here. This building where the auction house is was Hobgood Motors, Dodge, and Plymouth. Around 1950 was when this picture was taken. You've got the Standard Oil dealer sign, the big old neon Dodge sign. That would be worth a fortune if it was still around. And then the enameled metal service sign, those are worth a bunch of money too. You even have a nice old Dodge truck in there. That was probably the service truck at the time. This is a Fenton bell. You can probably tell just by the painting and the way it's done, because they had a lot of artists start doing hand painting, primarily floral or country scenes in the 1970s. But if you weren't sure, this one also has the Fenton paper label. This was used before the embossed stamp was done uniformly on all Fenton pieces. That really didn't happen until the late 70s, and this would be a mid-70s piece. It does have hand-painted and the artist's name on there. There were a number of different artists. There are a few collectors who look for particular artists that they like, but they're all fairly similar in the work. So fans of Crazy Lamp Lady and Digger Drew will recognize this because Garrett is the company that sponsors her. This is an older Garrett metal detector. Looks like something probably 1980s. The older ones you know, some of them are really good. You kind of have to know your models to know what is better and best in metal detecting. She could certainly tell a lot more about it than I can. I think this is an interesting thing, though. They just tore a building down here, and this might be something to take over and see if there's any amazing stuff in the rubble. This is fun. Now, this is an actual autograph. You can tell because if you looked up close with a magnifying glass, you see darker and lighter areas, and you would see that it doesn't have a dot print in it. So it wasn't one of the auto pens where it was signed by a machine. This is Al Fuzzy St. John, and he was a character actor in all sorts of Western movies. He just sort of had that face and got cast in that role a lot. He also had a real sense of humor about himself, and that's kind of fun to see. Next to it, we've got a really neat old jug here, and this is a rye whiskey jug. You ordered it from them, largest mail order grocer and liquor merchandiser in the West. I want to show this piece because this is a Heisey mold done by Imperial Glass in their slag glass colors in the late 1960s. You can see the remains of the Imperial label. When Imperial did these in the late 60s, after they bought the Heisey molds, Heisey went out of business in the late 50s. Collectors were really angry at first, but then Imperial was very smart about it. They made everything in different colors. They didn't do any of the clear like Heisey had done. This piece originally was shown in the movie The Glass Menagerie in 1952 with Jane Wyman, where she breaks all the animals at the end. That's glass animals from Heisey. This is Imperial's version. They've turned out to be collectible in their own right because they come in a lot of cool colors that Heisey never did. Behind you've got Roy Rogers, King of the Cowboys, and these Roy Rogers guitars have been around for a long time. This one was done when he died, 1998. And yes, he was considered the King of the Cowboys. And Trigger must have been the King of the Palominos, although Mr. Ed might have something to say about that. And he could talk. Down here are several pieces of Shawnee's cornware. It's a little different in color and shape. There was the regular corn, and then Corn King was a slightly different variety, and I'm not sure which is which. I would have to look into that. I used to know that on the top of my head, but I don't see enough of it side by side, so that's something that sometimes your knowledge, if you don't use it, you lose it. These are range size salt and pepper shakers. And that means that they were meant to go on the kitchen stove. That's why they're so big. No one really should put that much salt in their food at the dinner table. But it's nice to see several serving pieces here. There's also a nice little blue depression glass jug and some 1930s bowls. This one on the bottom, I believe, is Bauer pottery out of Los Angeles, even though it doesn't have the mark. It looks like their gloss pastel that came out in the late 30s. Because of the way that these rolled rings go. Down below, we've got one of these stoves that we see. These were freestanding, they could be carried, and this one's got the nice blue enamelware. These look really old. They were originally really old, but they actually made these for many decades. So this one could be as recent as maybe even the 1950s. You would see them made to put in cabins and things. But originally these came out about the turn of the century. And I think this is an older one because it says on it, Perfection Oil Heater. And with a name like Perfection, well, it must be perfect. Those are the types of things they like to name things back in the Victorian era. Perfection, world's best, Acme, all that kind of stuff. Acme, of course, was made fun of in Looney Tunes a lot. You never know what'll turn up at the auction. Dress forms are popular right now, and this one is the Magic Fit dress form from Sears in 1950s pink. Even the catalog is 1950s pink, which now would be known as millennial pink, I guess. It's neat because it has all these sections that come out. You could actually use it as a dress form, but a lot of people who get these are using them as mannequins and displays now. I've even seen people make lighting out of them, oddly enough, and it's kind of cool in a sort of macabre way. There's a table full of die-cast toys here. A lot of these are more recent vintage, but people really look for the ones that are Dale Earnhardt, particularly because of his early demise. And especially if they're from before his early demise. And then behind the milk bottles and everything here are some Tonka toys. I remember having this Jeep as a kid. They were pretty indestructible, and this one's still even got its headlights and the bumper, which are the things usually missing. It's a little scratched. The only thing it doesn't have is the metal rack They also did a pink version with the top on it, which was the one that was used in the Elvis movie, Elvis in Hawaii. Anyway, Elvis's movie in Hawaii, there was a pink one, and it has the tonneau with the pink stripes on it. That one's worth quite a bit of money. Okay, here's a really cool thing that I didn't see out on the floor that he brought out because he's got it in a special hidey place. And this is military. We believe it is Army from probably the First World War, because the gauge is a little lighter than Civil War. And the way that the guard is made is a little more of an Art Nouveau style. You don't think of stylistic things coming into weaponry, but actually a sword was something that was also used for dress parade and presentation, so style was part of it. It wasn't just used as a weapon. This is a really neat piece, and good swords like this can go for potentially several $100s. Now, we do see 50s moderns sometimes in this part of the country because it was just everywhere, and people really enjoyed it because of its freshness and novelty at the time. So finding this cool bird TV lamp here is not really that surprising. And the switch still seems good. Even if you're not able to plug something in and test it, the important thing is make sure that feels like it has a good solid click and that it's not rolling loose. Look at the wire to see if it's chewed. It isn't. And the prongs are good. I see no reason that this shouldn't work. Ideally, you'd want to test it if you could, but if you're on the fly in an auction, sometimes you just have to take a chance. And so those are some things you can look for if you're in a position where you can't really test something. And then because this challenge is hosted by Fatbird Finds, I of course have to show that there's an Afghan in this auction, and it's a pretty good one. It's a nice smaller size that you could use on a couch, but it's got the multi-layers and the florals that you see. It doesn't seem to have a lot of pilling or loose threads. It doesn't seem to have any holes, and the colors are great. And you don't see a lot in the white because the white tended to get stained. People would spill on it. They'd let the cat or the dog sleep on it, and pretty soon it was just sort of a rag. So to find this color and this shape is a pretty cool thing. And they need to get over here and visit and come to the auction anyway. So hopefully this will tempt them. Pyrex is very popular, as a lot of us are aware. They have 3 sets of the primary color refrigerator dishes here in the next auction, and they are complete sets. Those are going very well online. I have a feeling they'll go well here at the auction too. And the colors seem very strong, not dishwashed. All right, so this is Red Power Ranger and me. This was a store display. It is really cool. And the owner of the auction house loves Disney, loves childhood stuff, and I have a feeling this is gonna go home with him, but it's awfully cool. And if it comes up for bid, well, I'll be here. So we all need a haircut these days. I think that the salons are opening in a week or so, and in the meantime, it might be a few weeks. In the meantime, we can cover up with these therapeutic dry caps. This is something right out of the 60s. You've got to love that graphic. And let's see what this looks like when we get it out of the box. This is what I should have worn next to Power Ranger. If you plug this in, it gives you brains.
This guy obviously likes motorcycles too, and he's got a lot of neat 70s era dirt bikes and small bikes in the display here. Above them is the old Coca-Cola button. That's a classic. Drugstores with a soda fountain and grocery stores both used those back in the day in good condition like that, not restored, which that one is an original. Probably looking in excess of $1,000 now. To the right of it is an orange Crush bottle cap sign that you can see partially. There was also a Pepsi-Cola bottle cap sign in the previous display. Those old bottle cap signs are actually harder to find than the Coke buttons because they weren't as popular drinks back in the time. And so they are at least as valuable because they're definitely scarce. Sterling was a beer made in Evansville, Indiana, about an hour north of here. And so you would have seen that in places that were allowed to serve beer in this part of the country. And then to the left, hopefully we won't have too much glare, but I wanted to show you this really neat thing in the corner that looks like a skyscraper. That is an old cigarette machine. And we take for granted that you don't sell cigarettes loose like that where a minor could buy them, but you could up until the 1970s. And so a lot of these old machines have come out of the backs of old stores where they were stored once that wasn't allowed anymore. And then down below we've got a couple of neat old lawnmowers from the 1940s and 50s where the engine sat on top. That red plastic lid on the left there is a sort of post-Bakelite hard plastic composition. That's a Dixie Flyer lawnmower made in Alabama. And behind it is the green lawnmower. And yes, old lawnmowers are collectible as well. Those are probably worth a few $100s a piece. This guy's just got really cool stuff, and it's really neat that he has it where we can at least enjoy it together with him, even though he doesn't want to sell it, which I don't blame him. Here's an old street sign from town, and repainted and restored this great old school bell. So we're at the corner of Main Street and Old Highway 62 in Dawson Springs, and you see signs everywhere a sign. You can look at Bluebirds or go to Outwood, which is the old VA center built in the 20s because this was a place to recuperate. You can use your binoculars to watch a fire, or you can go to the Pennyrile Forest State Resort Park, which is a great resort right here, right next to Dawson Springs.
Because Dawson Springs was a resort town originally, the state of Kentucky decided that it would be a great place to put a state resort park, and it is still the biggest attraction in the area today. They're getting ready to reopen again. This is the Pennyrile Forest Resort Park and Lodge. The state of Kentucky runs a series of state resort parks, and they're all really nicely done. A lot of these were done in the 1940s and 50s. And its big attraction is that it is on a nice lake with recreational opportunities. There's horseback riding, there's swimming, there's playgrounds, there's pools, there's fishing. A lot of meetings are held here. There's horse and hiking trails as well as canoe trails. And there is a restaurant inside the lodge, which is probably the best dining and lodging in the area. The dam was a 1938 project, and the result was Pennyrile Lake. There are cabins on the other side that you can rent across from the lodge, and it's a lovely spot. It's also a spot that a lot of people discovered during the eclipse of 3 years ago. When the eclipse happened, Dawson Springs actually was the center of totality from the eclipse. So this little town that hadn't seen a big tourist rush since the early 1900s suddenly had 1 million people descend upon the general area. It caused a 7-hour traffic jam with people trying to get back to Louisville and Cincinnati and St. Louis. The smart ones stayed here in the resort and didn't have to deal with all of that. And here's the back of the resort, coming off of the dining room. Very stately place and really nicely appointed, very comfortable. My understanding is that there will be another total eclipse of the sun, and the totality will be shortly west of here, meaning that Dawson Springs should have a big tourist influx again. Downstream from Pennyrile Lake and the Forest Resort Park is Lake Bashir, named after the family of the current and former governors of Kentucky. And it is a really nice area to live and also a nice area for boating and recreation. This is where I got to go out during the total eclipse. It was an amazing place to see it. Everything went from absolute sunny happiness to dark, and the frogs and crickets started chirping, and it was extremely surreal. It was a wonderful experience. And this is a great place to live. And again, for lakefront property, really a lot cheaper than the average suburban home in a big city. So Dawson Springs has potential for people who are looking for a different kind of lifestyle. This rock here was a famous promontory in picture postcards 100 and some years ago. A lot of the people who came here for resorting and recuperation would pose by these cliffs. And here we are up on the cliff looking down into the river valley. Very nice, serene place to be. So I want to thank you all for joining me for this tour of Dawson Springs, Kentucky, my adopted new hometown. I am George the Antique Nomad, coming to you every day on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and YouTube and Periscope videos too.
I'm so glad to have you with us, and we'll see you again soon from somewhere in the antique world. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks for joining me again in the fun and fascinating antique community here where online meets the real world. Please click the subscribe button below, click the bell to be notified when new videos upload, leave a comment below, and hit thumbs up to like this video. Links to our online social media daily posts and our items for sale are in the description. This is George at the Antique Nomad. Bye for now.